In today's show, we continue our season review series, talking all things Anfernee Simons. What's Ant's future in Portland? Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You're listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making this show your first listen, coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. So make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen. Tell your friends to do the same. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's program, we are continuing our season review series where we'll run through every player on the roster and look back at what they did during the 24-25 season and what's going to come next for them, either in a Trailblazers uniform or elsewhere. We have done 6 of these now. This is number 7. Today, we're talking all things Anfernee Simons. We've hit the halfway point. We're going to touch on all the big ones. We'll do Jeremy Grant later this week, and then we'll kind of double up some of the role player ones and get through everybody. But here's what we do in these. We look back at the production for the 2024-2025 season. We'll have a visit from Michael from the past where I play you my predictions, best and worst case scenarios that I did in my season previews back in September. Kind of a way to look back to help us look forward, and then we'll talk at the end of the show, specific to Anfernee Simons, about his future with this team. He's entering the final year of his contract. He could be someone who gets traded this summer. The Blazers could find themselves paying Anfernee Simons, given a contract extension this summer. There are many ways this thing could go, and I think what and how they do it is going to be a pretty big turning point for this team, a pivot point one way or another. So let's get into Anfernee Simons. Last season, 19.3 points, 4.8 assists to go with 2.7 rebounds. Shot 42.6% from the floor, 36.3% from 3, and 90% at the free throw line. Played 32.7 minutes per game across 70 games, all starts. Turned 25 in June of 2024, which means he's, as we're recording this, 3 weeks away from his 26th birthday. Happy birthday to our great Gemini, Anfernee Simons. He began last season in 2020, in the fall of 2024, and he struggled. He did. He struggled out of the gates. Through the first 30 games, Anfernee Simons averaged 17 points per game, shot just shy of 41% from the floor, and 32% from 3. He missed 3 of those games, so that was his first 27, but the team's first 30. And during that stretch, he had 6 games in which he scored single digits, and just 6 games when he scored north of 25 plus. Those were all games played through 2026. He technically had 7, but one of those games he got hurt in, so I'm not counting that one. But 6 single-digit games over your first 27 and 6 25-point games over your first 27 for a dude whose value is scoring, that is a problem. Then on December 28th, he got on a little streak. Had 5 straight games of 20-plus points, his longest streak of any point during the season of Simons scoring 20 points per game, which is pretty telling in and of itself of how the season went for him. This is a dude who averaged north of 20 in each of the last 2 games, and he only had a 5-game streak there at the end of December and into the early January where he scored 20-plus points per game. But from that point forward, from the Blazers' 31st game of the season on, that's the final 43 games of Ant's season, the final 50 for the Blazers, because Ant sat in April. But from that stretch forward, starting with that stretch of 20-point games, Anfernee Simons averaged 20.7 points per game, shot 43.6% from the field, but importantly, 38.5% from 3 on 9 3-point attempts per game. Over the final 40-plus games of the season, the second half of the year, Anfernee Simons was like a good offensive player. He was just really bad during the first half of the season, and it all counts. And really bad by his standards, quite frankly. Honestly, anyone who shoots 32% from 3 as like a scoring combo guard, that's bad. Let's be honest. But Simons has set a bar where it's like he's a good shooter, and he was a good shooter to end the season. Don't get it twisted. And that stretch where I'm telling you over the final 43 games from December 28th on, that includes a 30-minute scoreless night against Philly that was sandwiched in between a couple stinkers. He had a bad game against Brooklyn that the Blazers lost. He had a bad game against Houston the Blazers lost. In between those 2 games, he had a 29-minute, 50-some second game against Philly where he did not score. Yikes. And then the Blazers got going, and they won 10 of 11 from that Houston game on. That was their stretch of the season that kind of turned the year around. And over those final 43 games, from December 28th on, he had just 5 single-digit games, including that stinker, that scoreless stinker. He had 6 single-digit games in his first 27, 5 over his last 43. Like, he didn't have those weird, quiet, gross nights. And then March 30th marked the end of Anfernee Simons' season. He had been dealing with a forearm injury. He was clearly in that game favoring the forearm, and then he sat over the final 7 games out with that forearm injury, and also out with we don't care. We're doing something different in April type of strategy. But that was the end of Anfernee Simons' season. On the whole, he had a pretty similar efficiency to from this season to last season to the season prior, maybe I should say. Those are the 2 years without Damian Lillard, when Anfernee Simons was kind of handed the keys. Can you be the guy who drives the boats, et cetera, et cetera? Can you be the lead engine of this offensive team? And pretty similar efficiency numbers. He didn't shoot as well from 3, but he made up for that with better finishing at the rim. He improved his percentages at the rim. While he didn't get there very often, his percentages at the rim jumped up in the 62% range after it had been below 60 the prior season. Like, that improvement at the rim was a big deal for Ant, and that helps kind of prop up his 3-point shooting, which did indeed dip. Overall, though, this was Anfernee Simons' least efficient scoring season in the league since his second year. He was a little bit worse. It's not dramatically worse, but if you taken as a whole, this was his least efficient scoring season, measured by points per shot, according to Clean and Glass, or true shooting percentage. If you want a more traditional, in terms of modern traditions, a more traditional approach, since his second season in the league, when he was entering the league, entering that year at 19. Like, he was super young. That was the first year he was playing real minutes. He basically didn't play his rookie year. And even in year 2, he was a backup, right? He played 70 games, he was backup. The efficiency took a dip this year. And I think that is kind of the challenge with Ant. I don't think he was bad. I think some people will tell you that. Some people don't like Anfernee Simons. I think it is the virtue of he's been on the team a long time. You get tired of familiar faces in some ways. The problem is that his path to being highly impactful is about offensive efficiency. It's about being a really high level offensive player in terms of efficient volume and efficiency. And Ant was a little bit worse there. I want to take a visit with Michael from the past, talk about where I set the polls back in September, because I think where I set those polls, kind of what my expectations were heading into the season, help us color how we, and that's a royal we, I mean how I felt about Anfernee Simons' production this season. So let's do that in the second segment. Michael from the past will join us, and we will talk about the production that we saw from Ant in year 6. Join me there, won't you? First, though, I want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Do you ever look at your bank account and think, where is all my cash? Where did my money go? Because you're living life, and life is expensive. You're eating out. You're buying stuff online. You're trying to entertain yourself and your family members, and you can just lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building your wealth. Maybe you have a couple accounts. You have an investments account here. You have a savings account. You have a checking account. You've got maybe a mortgage, what have you. And you might have to juggle a couple different apps to check all of your spaces where your money lives. Well, with Monarch Money, it's all in one place. There's no more juggling. You can track your spending and even plan long-term financial goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, and the code is LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. All right. So what I want to do here in this second segment is visit with Michael from the past If you're a long-time listener, you know the deal. But if you're new to the program, I do these season reviews or season previews, where I set the polls, best case and worst case scenarios. Best case scenarios within reason, worst case scenarios without injury. It's a way to kind of set what I think is maybe the high point, low point of outcomes for folks. And the aim is that everybody lands somewhere in the middle, that you get it mostly right and you figure out where they landed. Well, let's visit for Michael from the past and see what I said back in September about Anfernee Simons' year 6 coming up in the league. Take it away, Michael from the past. So what's the best case scenario for Anfernee Simons? It's that he averages 24.5 points, 6.5 assists, 4 rebounds. He shoots about 48% from the floor, 42% from 3, 93% from the free throw line, has a true shooting percentage right around 60%. He's an elite offensive force who continues to improve as a playmaker. He can play on the ball when they need him to. He can play off the ball and allow Scoot Henderson to have a little bit of space. He is a complement to new additions like Deni Avdija. He makes life easier for DeAndre Ayton. And his deficiencies, where he is a negative defender and likely always going to be a negative defender, are not as accentuated because he is an awesome offensive force. What's the worst case scenario for Anfernee Simons? It's not that much worse production-wise. It might take a keen eye, someone like you, dear listener, who has watched hundreds of Anfernee Simons games, to appreciate the difference. The worst case scenario is that he averages like 21 a game, 4 assists, 5 boards, shoots 42% from the field, 37% from 3, and 90% from the free throw line, and he has a below average true shooting percentage of like 53, 54%. And that's because he isn't this high volume, high efficiency scorer. Because he isn't that, then his deficiencies are more obvious. The difference is what he can be on the other end. He's going to be bad on defense. The difference is he good enough, like in December when he averaged 28 and 5 dimes and shot 40% from 3 on 10 attempts a game? Is he good enough on offense that it's not that it doesn't matter. It's that it becomes a different calculation. The best case scenario for Anfernee Simons is that what he does well absolutely shines all the time. And the worst case scenario is that what he does well isn't shiny enough such that what he does poorly is obviously rusted and busted. Thank you, Michael from the past. I think it's pretty clear that Anfernee Simons trended towards his worst case scenario. I do think Michael from the past may have transposed his rebounds and assists there at the end, but that's the challenge of recording by yourself and then listening back to it some 8 months later. In any case, Anfernee Simons did finish slightly above average true shooting percentage for his position, below average for the whole league, but there's centers out there, they dunk a lot. But for his position, he was slightly above average true shooting percentage for shooting guards, combo guard types, depending on how you want to measure him. He was above average for point guards. If you want to call him a point guard, he's above average true shooting percentage. But he didn't have the production. His production was dipped. Like his per game numbers were down from a year ago. But also the Blazers, they had Deni Avdija this year, and he took over a bigger chunk of the scoring than had been the case in the past. Simons' usage dipped in this year 6 as opposed to year 5, with just a sort of new flavor of how just a little bit less, I would say, a little bit less on ball, a little bit less opportunity, and probably a slightly smaller ask overall in terms of his offensive load. Not dramatically different. He still got to dribble the ball a lot and run pick and rolls and shoot and have the kind of carte blanche to make some decisions as an offensive leader. But he was a little bit worse. And I think he trended towards that worst case scenario. For some guys averaging, 19 and 5, you'd be like, that's a pretty good basketball player. For Simons, though, he needed to be more productive. And I'll say this, Anfernee Simons remains a negative defensive player, for sure. I'm not going to talk you out of that. But for all of Anfernee Simons' faults this year, and for the dipping efficiency, and for the negative defender he is, I think he was still pretty obviously the Trailblazers' third best player this season, which is not a judgment on future production of any young guards on the roster, but I just think it's like a factual statement of what happened during the 24-25 season. I think Anfernee Simons was the Trailblazers' third best player. That might be damning him with faint praise, considering the Blazers roster and maybe his expectations. But he was a guy who got a lot of opportunity, and I think he was taken against just his coworkers kind of fine, right? And moreover, he was on the court a bunch. He was part of the Blazers. He was part of the Blazers' 5 most used lineups, according to Cleaning the Glass. So, depending on how you kind of want to squeeze it with Anfernee Simons, you could either point to the lineup that began the season with Simons and Toumani Camara, Deni Avdija, Jeremy Grant, and DeAndre Ayton that played 500 possessions together and was horrendous, minus 14 differential. Just absolutely could not score and didn't really stop anyone to boot. That was part of the early season sort of growing pains with Deni Avdija. Jeremy Grant was not very good this season. The first 30 games of the DeAndre Ayton's year are also pretty bad next to Simons, who Simons had pretty rough the first 30 games. Like, yeah, that group was terrible. Simons was also part of the Anfernee Simons, Shaedon Sharpe, Toumani, Jeremy Grant, and Ayton lineup when they subbed Deni out and moved Shaedon Sharpe into the starting group for the sort of that brief period to begin the first half of the season. That group played almost 300 possessions together. They were even worse, horrendous. They just absolutely could not score second percentile, according to Cleaning the Glass, among 5-man lineups, and 12th percentile on defense. They were awful. Yeah, Simons was part of both of those. But Simons was also part of the Blazers' most productive lineup when he played alongside and Deni and Jeremy Grant and Donovan Clingan for 150 possessions. And they blitzed people on defense, an 81.8 defensive rating. Now, that is courtesy of a very small sample size, just 150 possessions, probably not particularly meaningful. But again, that's the Blazers' 5th most used lineup. That lineup was positive. The Blazers' 2nd most common lineup with Ant, Shea, Toumani, Deni, and Clingan had a positive differential. That same group, Ant, Shea, Toumani, Deni, and Ayton had a positive differential. Anfernee Simons, depending on how you want to put this together, was either part of the Blazers' best lineups or his worst lineups. Both are true. And this is kind of what I mean by Ant. Like he was part of it. Like and what I mean by Ant was like was Blazers' 3rd best player. Is like he through some ups and downs and through like whatever sort of lineup data you want to prove that like paints him as awful, you can find it. But you can also find some lineup data that's like, yeah, the Blazers are pretty good with it. In fact, I would point to this. The whole first half of the Blazers year, the first 41 games, that team was not good. They were bottom 5 in offense, bottom 5 in defense. It was a bad basketball team. When they took off in the second half of the year, certainly they did it against a softer schedule and like the weird March-April NBA season where some teams are like very actively trying to lose and like pulling Scotty Barnes and Jakob Poeltl off the court right in front of your eyes on a Sunday afternoon. But like, sure, like all of that's real. The silliness of March and April are real. But for January and February, when the Blazers kind of got going heading into the All-Star break, Anfernee Simons was on the court a ton. He played all of those games during their best stretch, and he was playing on a high-level defense, a defense that ranked in the top 5 and briefly the best defense in the league. But like he was a big minute contributor on a very, very productive defensive team. I think this was Anfernee Simons' best year on defense. Does that mean he's a good individual defender? It absolutely does not. Does that mean that he wasn't the obvious weak link in the Blazers defense? Obviously he was. Like if you watch the games, they went after him, right? They said, let's go get him. Get number 1. Like, it still is all those things. And yet, for all of his warts, I think he was the Blazers' 3rd best player, and I think he was part of the productive, he was a big minute part of the productive part of the season, and he didn't hurt them on defense. And yet, with all of that being said, all those positive things being said there, where it's like, I think he's pretty good. If you look at overall on-off numbers, the Blazers were worse on offense with Anfernee Simons on the court, and they were worse on defense with Anfernee Simons on the court. The team scored more points more efficiently in terms of points per possession when he was on the bench, and they gave up fewer points defensively when he was on the bench. The offense and defense were both better with Anfernee Simons on the bench. I don't think on-off should be taken as gospel or even considered as like a particularly indicative statistic, but it is when it is as drastic as it is for certain players who play big minutes. I think it is worth pointing to and thinking about why. Some of it is that Scoot Henderson is a better connective point guard than Anfernee Simons and probably gets the Blazers more organized than Ant does because Ant's a scorer, right? He's a combo guard. And on defense, you're just, I don't think Scoot is a better defensive player yet than Anfernee Simons, but he's trending that way for sure, and he has certainly more defensive potential at this point in his career than Ant does. I just think overall Scoot makes more mistakes on defense than Ant does, because Ant tries hard. He's just freaking bad at it. So where does that leave us with Anfernee Simons? He had one of his worst efficiency shooting wise, like worst efficient scoring seasons of his career. He was a big minute producer when the defense got good, and yet the indicators suggest he was part of the Blazers' worst lineups and best lineups in terms of the groupings that played together the most. And then the Blazers were better with him on the bench than they were on the court on both sides of the ball. It paints an interesting picture, and one that is highlighted, put up a backdrop against the fact that Anfernee Simons is entering a contract year. What do you do with a conundrum like this? Well, quite frankly, my tune hasn't changed. Let me sing you a familiar song and talk about what the Blazers' options are and what I believe they should and also should have done with Simons in the third segment. Join me there. Still a pass first point guard. Still Mike Richmond. You are still listening to Locked On Blazers. If you're an everydayer, a longtime listener to this program, you know that last summer I was pretty vocally and straightforward on board that the Blazers needed to move on from Anfernee Simons. It was time. They needed to explore trades for him. Not that they needed to trade him for nothing, but it was time for them to actively pursue trades because at the time, here was my take. Even if Scoot Henderson sucks, Anfernee Simons has proven to you with his 1 year at the helm of the team that he is not capable of being the engine of a really good offense. And so even if you trade Anfernee Simons for whatever and you make Scoot the starting point guard and still Scoot sucks, you're going to be in a bad spot. But if you hold on to Anfernee Simons, he's not good enough to pull you out of the mud on his own. That was my take back in 2024, right around this time. I feel the same way. But the context has changed a little bit. One, they didn't trade Anfernee Simons last summer. In fact, from the public reporting we have, they didn't really explore trading Anfernee Simons last summer, right? It's like, every team in the league takes calls on every player, right? Like that's like, from what I understand, it's like if you're doing your job right, the trade value of every player on your roster because you kind of figured out, right? That's like the due diligence of running of an NBA team, but not like actively pursuing trades. That's a different thing. And from what I believe has been publicly reported, the Blazers never explored trading Anfernee Simons. And when we got to the trade deadline this year, there was, again, no public reporting of the Blazers exploring trades for Anfernee Simons. And that's for a couple reasons. One, I don't think Anfernee Simons' archetype is particularly coveted across the league. A not quite point guard who doesn't defend very well. And that's just like the league values multi-positional defenders. If you're going to be Anfernee Simons' size, it'd be better if you're a pure point guard. He's not that. He's definitely improved significantly over his career as a playmaker, no doubt about it, but he's not like a natural awesome passer. Most of his good playmaking stuff comes off of like drawing attention of double teams, making the right pass, having a little bit of on-ball gravity, or just like knowing how to make a quick pick and roll read, like a fast read as opposed to like a really high level read. But certainly from where he was to begin his career and even where he was to begin his kind of like, you're going to play a lot more now, and now he's dramatically better as a playmaker. But he's not a pure point guard by any means. And he is not a good defensive player by any means. And that archetype is not particularly coveted. So the fact that the Blazers were either unable or unwilling to trade Anfernee Simons is not a stunner by any means, although one podcaster was calling for it a lot last summer. And I still feel the same way. The difference is that last year, Scoot Henderson was coming off a deeply disappointing rookie season. And my argument for it didn't have a lot of teeth that, hey, even if Scoot sucks, it's okay. The gap between Anfernee Simons and Scoot Henderson has closed a lot. I don't think, for me, last season, Scoot Henderson was better than Anfernee Simons. I think that is too rich. I don't even think that's particularly close. But like, you aren't buying past production. You're when you're building a team, you are thinking about the now and into the immediate future, right? Maybe like on a 2-year type of curve. And the idea that either of the young guards, Scoot Henderson or Shaedon Sharpe, couldn't be better than Anfernee Simons, over the next, say, 150 games, that seems like a pretty reasonable take. Like even if I wouldn't make that argument, I am very comfortable. That seems like a very reasonable belief to have. That's fine with me. I would have to sit with it a little bit more to see if I think it or not. But I'm certainly, I think that's a very reasonable belief to have. So now the difference in me saying that last year is like, hey, even if Scoot sucks, Anfernee Simons isn't good enough to get you out of the mud. It felt real that Scoot might stink last year. It doesn't feel as real, right? Like Scoot Henderson's much closer to being like a starting level point guard. Is he like a high level starter right now? Heck no. But he's much closer to that than he was, and he certainly improved a lot in year 2. And you got to feel, you don't have to feel anything actually, because the Blazers already made a choice in a lot of ways. They drafted Scoot Henderson 3rd overall. It would be bizarre to take a dude 3rd overall and for 3 consecutive years make him be a bench player. They tried not to make him a bench player his rookie year. He wasn't ready. That was Scoot's fault. Year 2, would have been coming off the season he had. It might have been a little bit weird to be like, hey, Scoot, you're going to be the starter, even if I was calling for it, right? That might have been a weird decision. Now I feel the other way. If Scoot isn't your day 1 starting point guard, it's not like a crime, but it is very bizarre decision-making, which is why I feel that Anfernee Simons' future with the Blazers is much more about the Trailblazers as a franchise than it is about Simons. They should explore trades for him. As recovered on this podcast, there's reportedly, at least according to Jake Fisher of the Steinline, some interest in Anfernee Simons from the Orlando Magic, and certainly we've talked about the trade ad nauseum on this particular program. Something like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Gary Harris and a draft pick. I don't think Anfernee Simons has a ton of trade value. Maybe you get more than the trade I just cooked up for you there. But like that would be my guess, right? If I had to guess how it went down, that's my guess. But if they don't do that, this is what the situation has changed from last year to this year. Because my take remains pretty much the same. Anfernee Simons was a little bit worse this year than he was a season ago, but he's probably a little bit better on defense. He was a more functional part of a good team, although his personal production was a little bit worse. But the point is winning basketball games, and Anfernee Simons probably contributed more positively to winning basketball games this season in year 6 than he did in year 5. He's entering a contract year. He has 1 year remaining on his deal. Pardon me. I've said year 6 several times in the show. That was just year 7. He's entering his 8th season, and he's entering the final year of his contracts. Came off his 4-year rookie deal, signed another 4-year $100 million deal. It was they probably paid him to take steps that he hasn't yet taken as a player, but I don't think he's like wildly overpaid, particularly on a 1-year deal. He was made, it's different kind of money on a multi-year deal down the line, but for 1 year, it's not crazy to pay Anfernee Simons that much money, particularly in the rising environment of the cap. But what a team trading for him now gets is the right to pay him his next contract. So the math has changed a little bit. If the Blazers do not find a deal for him in the offseason, trading him at the deadline or into the season means you're trading a rental and a guy that will enter unrestricted free agency. And what teams that are trading for rentals do is they negotiate down. Anfernee Simons' trade value is not going to get higher as you get towards the trade deadline. It's almost certainly going to get worse. your best case scenario from here is it remains relatively flat. But there even a awesome year from Anfernee Simons heading into February still puts him in that rental category where teams will be able to negotiate against the uncertainty of Anfernee Simons heading into free agency. So there is a world in which the Blazers, in fact, he's been extension eligible since July of last year. Like he could at any moment sign a new deal. There is a scenario in which the Blazers either this summer decide to re-up Anfernee Simons, which to me would be bonkers. It would just be outrageous. But like certainly they could. Or they find themselves at the trade deadline not finding an appealing deal and kind of back themselves into giving Anfernee Simons a third contract. Because it's not like he's awful. It's just he's probably a sixth man, and in this particular setting, because of the sort of the politics of him being better than Scoot Henderson and longer tenured and et cetera, it is weird. It is hard to see a world in which Anfernee Simons can comfortably move to a bench role on this particular team. Certainly, I think a bench role in his future is reasonable, and I don't think that that's even controversial at this point. But I do think on this particular team, it is an odd sell for him. But the Blazers may find themselves, if they don't make a move, backing into trading Simons. Signing Simons, excuse me. So where I have, last year I was, vociferous in my call for the Blazers to explore Anfernee Simons trades. Nothing has changed there. What has changed is if they don't do it, if this isn't a decision they make, it not only is bizarre for the decisions they've made by drafting two other guards in the lottery, and Shaedon Sharpe and particularly Scoot Henderson third overall, it speaks to those decisions. It is starting the clock on whether they back themselves into retaining Anfernee Simons or have to take a sort of a deal up against that ticking clock where everyone knows this dude's entering free agency. The Blazers either have to trade him in February or let him walk or give him some money. The time, if they're going to do it, is this summer. If I had to bet right now, of course I'm not going to bet that they trade him. This series of moves leading to this point, what would make me believe that the Blazers are interested in moving Anfernee Simons and will take the steps to do so? In part because they're probably not going to get that particularly juicy trade package back. And I don't think from what we've seen from the front office over the last, say, 2.5 seasons, they're not like a team that wants to take back bad deals, right? They're going to do their absolute damnedest to come out winners, whatever that might look like to them. Do they have the appetite for taking back a bad deal? And I think the other balancing here, as I close up the show, is that the Blazers got a little bit better at the end of last season, right? They were competent to end the year. Competent against a soft schedule, but competent nonetheless. Winning games is the point, and they were able to win some games, and they basically just took care of business against all the bad teams. If they're committed to taking further steps forward, okay, we won 36 games, we expect to win 40 or whatever. Be in that same range. There is a world in which trading Anfernee Simons makes the team worse, and that is not as palatable for a franchise that got a little bit better. And I think that is the challenge they might find themselves against, is that they took a step forward this year. But the best decision that they might be able to make is take these half step backs or minor step backs, because Anfernee Simons is the team's best shooter, and they will miss that shooting most likely in a trade that they make. But the challenge for team building is being willing to take half and quarter steps back in the immediate term, knowing that it opens up space for other guys to play. It is a forward-facing move. It is a decision about 2027, not about 2026 type of thing. I think one thing that I will be curious to monitor as we watch the Anfernee Simons situation play out is the Blazers' appetite for that. Is this a team that is committed to being kind of competitive? Or is this a team that has this sort of like big, broader view and says, you know what, this is going to make us a little bit worse, but we get a draft pick and we get blah, blah, blah. Or do they prioritize someone who is like not draft picks and like more veteran help? Because you're allowed to trade Anfernee Simons for productive players. And how they make this move and if they make this move will be something fascinating to monitor. And again, I'm going to bet against them doing it at all just because I've paid attention to the things that they've done and haven't done so far. My take on Anfernee Simons hasn't changed, but the situation has, and it is slowly, we're kind of moving at a glacial pace towards decision-making time. That is going to do it for today's program. Rest of the week, we'll do draft stuff. We'll do more player reviews, and we'll continue all off season long. 5 days a week, wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.